Hello, and welcome to Season 4 of the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. For the past few years, host Jorden Guth has been learning about the who, the what, and the when of hi-fi from the pioneers who made our hobby what it is today, as well as the modern innovators who are constantly striving to push performance to new levels. That's not going to change, but this year he'll also be learning about the other two W's, where your favorite gear is made these days, and why. So with that out of the way, let's see who Jorden is chatting with this time around.
Hello and welcome to the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. Today we are in Arendal, Norway with Thomas Gunvaldsen. How is that pronunciation?
That is pretty good.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
The head of product and the CTO at Arendal Sound. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jorden.
Thanks for jumping on. And for everyone listening, we're actually recording this in November of 2025, but this will actually get released sometime in February. So I don't know the exact date because I'm not looking at the calendar, but sometime in February. And the reason being that we're going to talk about the new product, the 1610, a little bit. So excited to get to that. But because we haven't had you on here before, Thomas, let's start with kind of hearing a little bit about how you got into hi-fi. So, or how you got into speaker design and all the fun stuff that you do.
For sure. So for me, like the interest between or behind speaker design kind of stems from, I guess, my early teens. Well, I was growing up with a father that was kind of I wouldn't say audiophile, but he was an enthusiast. He had some JBLs at home, a record player, and I quite vividly remember, I think I was 13 at that point. We went building our own speaker from, just pieces of MDF, putting together a pretty small bookshelf speaker at that time. And we were testing a bunch of different like fillings inside the speaker to see what made what kind of sonic differences. And that kind of got me hooked, I think, to some degree. So I've had that interest in like sound and just tinkering with stuff from a pretty early age. And I would say it really took off after I got 18 and I had my first car. That's when I went crazy on car stereo. It first started off with I just wanted a lot of bass, and I built kind of almost like a dB drag car, so it was playing ridiculously loud, 140 something dB, I remember. And then just a lot of bass kind of got boring after a little bit, and then I got into something called or I prepared my car really for something called EMMA. That's like the European Mobile Media Association.
Okay.
I think you have in the US something called IASCA that's kind of similar, which the whole purpose is making a stereo sound in car that sounds realistic, and you have like a sound stage and center stage in front of the dashboard. That's the whole purpose, right? So I had this old Korean shitty car that I picked everything out of the car, the whole interior, and I used butyl sheets to damp everything, the doors, the floor, even the ceiling in the car. And I had like this absorbing material. I spent way too much time on this stuff.
Yeah.
I had drivers that I made like these fiberglass enclosures on the doors and on the A-pillars. And amplifiers, active, like a head unit that you can do all time delays, PQs, crossover points.
No way.
All this stuff. So I had, I think, like a three-way front stage with subs in the rear in the end. And I think it started sounding pretty good. I never ended up going to one of these events though. So, I never competed. It was like a competition thing. But that set me, I think, on track of also becoming a lot more interested in hi-fi speakers and how they work, how all the acoustics behind it work, and then how can I make, or how can I take this, what I've learned from the car stereo, into making my own speakers that I can enjoy in my living room, which, well, at that time, it wasn't much of a living room. It was like a student small apartment, right? Tiny one. You have the bedroom and the living room and the kitchen in the same area, right?
Yeah, the studio apartments.
Yeah.
Well, and was that where your love for Butyl came in?
Oh, I think that came from the car stereo times. Yeah,
that's awesome. We're gonna get into that because we know Thomas's secret when it comes to engineering stuff is lots of Butyl.
Butyl. That's the stuff.
Awesome.
I love it.
So, okay, you start in the car audio experience.
Mm-hmm.
Was this when you were going to university, or?
Well, just before. I think the year before university, that's when the car stereo stuff really started kicking off for me. And then throughout university, well, that's also kind of where I got into making speakers, like home speakers. So I started, well, that's funny. I met a guy here, which later became my colleague at a point. And he was into car stereo, so he was selling car stereo equipment and whatnot. So I met him at like a local shop and we started talking a lot. And he had also a lot of experience with making hi-fi speakers, right? So that became a friendship out of that. And he was guiding me along the way, on how to build crossovers a bit, how to set up the speakers. He was a good help in those early days. So when I was, I think, like 19, that's when I started making my first real speakers. Me and my friend in his grandpa's garage, like way up in the countryside. I remember us sitting there in like 20 Celsius minus, gluing together. It was quite an elaborate construction, actually. I made it was a 2-piece cabinet. So I first made an inner cabinet with what's it called? It's not MDF, but it's even softer than MDF.
Like particle board,
not well, maybe. I don't think particle board is quite the same, but something that's softer and cheaper.
Yeah. Okay.
I had, I think, a 12 millimeter thick cabinet internally with the stuff that I had to make finished before I could put the outer walls, which were birch ply. Plywood.
Yeah, plywood.
Yeah, pretty thick pieces. I think like 20 something millimeter, which was glued together with like this vibro elastic glue, to kill all resonances. And similar to Butyl, right?
Absolutely.
And that became a pretty big speaker. I think it ended up weighing like 80, 90 kilos, something like that. With only 2 7-inch woofers and then a mid-range and a tweeter, which I swapped out, I think, like 3 times, tried different tweeters to kind of see what worked best and what not. And I spent probably 2 years making the crossovers on the speakers before I were happy. I was messing around with everything, back in those days. I was just really getting into the hobby and reading all the I would call it snakeoil today on what makes a speaker sound good. So I tried, all sorts of different cable materials. I even stripped capacitors off they have like this plastic wrapping around them. There's this Danish guy, he was very adamant that you had to strip it off and then cover it with cotton and dunk it in linen oil.
What?
That made everything sound great. And I did all this, and I couldn't tell a difference, right? So, but it was like a long journey of just trying different things, different types of drivers, different crossover topologies, and I really learned a whole lot from that. I was also doing some measurements at that point, because obviously you have to do some measurements, so you kind of get an idea of what you're doing on the crossover. If you're just doing it blind out of some theory, it just will never work.
Yeah, it could change your opinion of it based on the mood of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's sunny one day and dark the next, you feel a little bit different, so it doesn't sound quite as good.
Yeah. So that was a great learning experience for me. After I'd made those speakers, well, I was tinkering back and forth, but I got into making a new set of speakers that I thought was sounding really, really good at the end. And it was actually something I was considering making my own loudspeaker brand of, and doing this whole thing by myself at the age of 21, maybe 22.
So you're still kind of going through university?
Yeah. Still at university. So I had what's it called? Like a it's not like a garage, but like a tiny space to stuff
little
things.
workshop.
It wasn't a workshop either. It was just to put things in like a small shed.
Okay.
You could say, yeah. And that shed was just filled to the brim with different drivers because I was buying drivers everywhere. I wanted to test everything, and I think it gave me a whole lot of experience on kind of what works and what doesn't from a driver perspective. And so I made these finished, and this is kind of a side thing, but I went to China together with a friend of mine when I was 22. And we were thinking, let's import some tube amps to Norway because I was, really into the hi-fi things and tube amps. I love tube amps at that point. And I also wanted to visit a loudspeaker factory in China to see what I can do with my speakers.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of my first venture into China. It was like this whole new world, completely different from what I had expected, in a very positive way, I'd say. But I found this factory. They seem to make great products. But I ended up never really pursuing it because I kind of found out that I was really to my depths when in terms of like the business side of it. I didn't really know where to start off. And secondly, the visual aspects of those speakers, I have no idea how I could make that look nice.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting there is that there's a self-awareness that you could take a step back and realize, well, I don't know the different components that I need to know in order to actually make this a success.
Yeah.
You had that self-awareness.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going through university, you're making these speakers, you take your trip to China, which I think is just absolutely wild. And you had this cool little side story about the, I'm assuming it was the same factory. They gave you like a swatch sample of like wood that.
Oh, They had like a booklet when I came down to the factory of different types of wood finishes. And it was all, it was like a magazine, all the sheets were super thin, and it was paper. So these wood sheets were paper. So what they do is they glue this paper on the speaker on the cabinet, and then they'd paint it with a clear coat or a matte clear or whatever you wanted to, and it looked like real wood in the end. It looked pretty good. So I kept on to this book for many years, and later on when I started doing this professionally, this is something that came up. I've asked some factories, is this something you do? And they're all just scratching their heads. You understand what I'm talking about? They're like, what is this? It never got to anything. But a few years later, I met with this, the same factory boss, actually, that I visited back in China the first time. And he didn't recognize me. I recognized him after, we'd stayed together for a little while. And I asked him, do you know what this paper is? Have you ever, used some sort of paper that's made that looks like wood and you glue on the speaker? And he's like, yeah, it's not something we really use, but it's really popular for furniture and it's something we used to do in the past. I'm like, yeah, you gave me this booklet, back in 2008, 2009, or what was it? And then it dawned on him also, was so happy to see me again, whatever. He didn't speak English, so I was, some communication barrier also. But that was really, really funny.
That is awesome. Years later.
Yeah, many, many years later. A fun thing though also, while I was studying, I'd probably gotten a lot better grades on my studies if I hadn't really pursued all this hi-fi stuff in the depth that I did, because I was probably studying more, hi-fi, loudspeakers, what makes a good speaker, acoustics, all this. That was really fascinating to me. But my degree was in a completely different path. That was on business economics, and administration.
Oh, there you go. I have a degree in economics too. There you go.
Awesome.
Nothing to do with what I do today.
Yeah,
but it was
likewise.
interesting nonetheless. So you finish school, you have that business degree, you have the self-awareness that one, you really enjoy doing the speaker stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like that is a passion right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you also kind of realize that you don't have the business acumen built up yet.
Yeah.
And or the financing.
Oh, for sure.
And there's some areas that you still need to learn.
Yeah.
But you kind of have that path. You're into the audio.
Mm-hmm.
Does that lead you to L Sound, or is there something else in between there?
Yes, there was something else in between. So I was working, I think, at a local brewery on sales, for a couple of years, which also really didn't have anything to do with what I studied. But then this guy that I mentioned earlier that I had befriended during my car stereo days, he just sent me a message on Facebook or Messenger, I think, and asked me, I'm working at this loudspeaker company now, or audio company. Are you interested in starting to work in the audio scene? And I'm like, yeah, of course I am. Well, what you got? And then he was working with Jan, the owner of Arendal Sound.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And this is way before Arendal
This is
Sound.
way before. This is in a company called L Sound.
Yes.
So then they brought me in for interviews, and we seemed to hit it off. I think that's the longest job interview I've ever had in my life. I mean, that was more than half a day of sitting across a table, drinking coffee, and then talking, about, firstly, of course, everything about myself and what I can and can't. And but then, we just ventured into like this friendly talk about audio and passion. And yeah. So they ended up hiring me. And I started working at L Sound in the warehouse.
Okay.
Moving boxes.
And for those that don't know, L Sound is, or was rather, a distribution company for a bunch of well-known, well-respected hi-fi components, speakers, cables, electronics, all of that.
Yes.
And it was primarily in Norway, or did it venture into Europe? Or
yeah, primarily it was Norway, right? So we imported different electronic brands, speaker brands we sold in Norway, but then we also had SVS was one of the biggest brands we had.
Okay.
And we got the European distribution for SVS. So we were selling mainly SVS and some other few brands throughout Europe for a number of years before then venturing into our own brand, Arendal Sound, which is kind of the leeway to where we are now, right?
Yeah, there we go. So we kind of covered this in a previous podcast with Jan, where the idea from L Sound and the passion of audio and all of that, to kind of getting a little fed up with the suits and and the kind of drama behind the business of doing all that.
Yeah.
So Arendal Sound comes into being.
Yes.
You're part of it right from the get-go.
Yeah.
The first speakers that are designed from Arendal Sound, did you have a hand in that?
Oh, I did. But at that point, not nearly as much as I do today. So that was much more of everyone's involved kind of an effort, because that was before we'd launched the company, right? So we had all these ideas of what kind of speakers we wanted to make. We had kind of a certain market niche already with what we have imported and sold throughout Norway and Europe that we know worked for our type of consumers. So I think we were maybe a little more biased towards home cinema than hi-fi back in those days, comparably to where we're now, I'd say. Don't get me wrong, the speakers were also, we listened to the speakers and made them so that they would sound great with music, right?
Yeah.
But home cinema was also a big part of it. So then we had all the accessory speakers, the center, the surround speakers, and all of that. So that was the 1723 range that we started designing then back in 2013 or so. And then we launched the full speaker range with subwoofers maybe the subwoofers came a couple of months later. I can't fully recollect. But then that was launched in end of 2015.
Okay.
So that's when Arendal was born. We had this new speaker lineup, and we started selling through L Sound at the time. So L Sound
was like a house brand.
Yeah. So we already have a big
distribution network,
customer group, right?
Yeah.
So we could reach out to all of them, and that I think that really helped kick off our brand, especially in Norway, right? Because that's where we had the largest footprint.
All right. So now Arendal Sound is up and running. You got some speaker lines. The next big, or in my mind, the next big shift, I'm sure there's stuff in between there, but the 1528, when those launched, and before they launched, Soundstage founder Doug Schneider saw these. We kind of got a little early access, and we came down and did all this. But he was amazed because he's like, this is such like a leap in terms of, well, one, the design, which is what we saw right off the bat, and then once we got here, the sound quality was absolutely amazing. So between the original speakers to the 1528.
So firstly, we introduced the 1723 range, right? And then a year after, we came with like the baby 1723s. That's the 1723 S series. So that means small.
Ah, there you go.
Maybe that was a poor naming choice at that time, because some people thought of that S, it's like the special or
Speed
super, or
yeah.
the better one. What it was just a scaled down version of the original one. 6.5-inch drivers instead of 8-inch in the full series. And then after that, we came with the 1961 series, which also was really using the same design language that we have on the original 1723, the same train of thought, right? And even from that early stage, we had most, I would say, of the kind of the ideas and reasoning behind how we designed the drivers and the speakers. So dynamic and big sound and really capable of output. That's something I think that stuck with us for all these years and still is a high priority. But when we launched 1528, or when we started working on 1528, we'd kind of seen that maybe we are a bit too perceived as being a home cinema brand.
Okay.
That's one part of it, which we maybe we didn't fully really want. Not necessarily that we didn't want to be there, but we also wanted to be recognized for having great sounding two stereo or stereo speakers, right? For hi-fi listening, which that's always been my personal passion, right? And at that point also, I had gone from, being partially into the design of the full series. We also used some consultants, right, for things that we didn't know how to do in the beginning. To basically, we're doing more or less everything ourselves at this point. And we spent really a long time on developing the 1528. So we went through a whole bunch of different driver designs. And we even went out and we thought we just want the best. So we went out and we bought drivers from these different manufacturers that supposedly make the kind of the best of the best out there.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want to skimp. If we can't deliver, the best quality, then we might as well just go and buy the parts from someone else.
Yeah.
And so we did all this testing on tweeters, on mid-ranges, on woofers. And it just kind of boiled down to we can do it better ourselves than what we can find in the marketplace for what we want to do with our designs. So I think we had like almost a 3-year development on that project, just because we were testing and listening, measuring, and figuring out like the best materials to use, especially on the drivers for each specific frequency range. So we end up with this lithium magnesium tweeter on the top end, which we found is some of the best material we've worked with from a sonic perspective. It's right up there next to beryllium. But then beryllium is, it's difficult because they require really high quantities.
Yeah.
And they tend to, there's not many people or manufacturers that do beryllium. There's one really main one in the US that produce this material, and they're really, if you don't buy enough, they'll just, find some reason not to really care about you anymore.
Yeah.
And then
push you off to the side.
Yeah, that's one thing with it. And then the second thing is the tolerances in production. From what we heard of others in the industry, can really be like a full batch of tweeters that don't really work to spec. So to avoid that, we found this other material that worked really, really, really well. It has even better damping properties than beryllium. So using it lower down into the vocal region of females, we found it even works better. And then we had the mid-range that we really spent a lot of time on kind of fine-tuning and digging out the best cone materials. So we end up with this cone material that I haven't really seen anyone else. Maybe there are some that use it now. It's a carbon, and it's not a carbon weave like in a normal carbon cone. This is like a mash of the carbon fibers. So they're kind of mixed all together in like a mash with this graphene. It's like they mix graphene and epoxy in some way, and they press it into shape. So this has like a super, super high stiffness, but it also gives you better damping than a normal carbon cone would.
Oh,
so you have the stiffness from carbon, but then with better damping properties. So it really also shines even better in the upper mid-range. And we made it sealed with a huge magnet, and that was giving us a lot of sensitivity to work with. We also raised the FS of the driver, so you have a fairly high crossover point on this driver, but it makes it so detailed, so dynamic, and then so light, nimble on his feet, if I can say. But then again, that creates some new challenges, because now the woofers have to be crossed over at a higher point than most manufacturers out there do with their designs. So we end up with this curved baffle to really time align all the drivers, especially for the tower, where you have a full stack of woofers playing the same range up to 400 or so hertz. And that just really helps to get the alignment perfectly in place.
So that's interesting. Even covering these speakers, I didn't fully realize that the curve, which is like an iconic element of this design, was actually for the time alignment. I didn't realize that it was that functional. Oh, it's really neat.
That was something I really had to struggle and push the team onto to get through from like a design perspective, because they were not ready for it at the time. We had this slanted flat baffle that was like tilted backwards, and that was kind of our design language, right? And after a long time with discussions and fine-tuning on the industrial design of it, we managed to come up with a solution that everyone was like, yeah, okay, this works, this looks nice, we agree, yeah, let's do this.
It's a great looking speaker. And then I think that kind of brings us perfectly to what we've been looking at the last couple of days, and everyone's going to see by the time this podcast is out, it's going to be announced. So the 1610, basically you're taking a lot of the learnings from the 1528 and scaling it down into a smaller package.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole idea behind 1610 is that we want to make a stepping stone down from the 1528 with all of the good qualities that speaker has from a sonic perspective and obviously also from a design perspective. We want to trickle that down, step down, so it is not just cheaper, but it also is easier to fit into a living room setting or any normal rooms for that matter. The 1528 tower is pretty big and pretty domineering.
So in maybe a good idea, the 1610, what speakers do you have in that lineup?
So we have a tower speaker, which is a tower with 3 8-inch woofers. So we kept the 8-inch size on the woofers. We've just managed to narrow down the width of the cabinet a bit. And then we have the waveguide tweeter assembly with a 5-inch mid-range, same as we do for the 1528, and a 28 millimeter tweeter, which is also the same size as we use for the 1528. So it is in a more compact package. It's not as tall. It's a little less wide than the 1528, and it's not as deep as the 1528. But we kept kind of the sonics and the dynamics, the depth of bass, and we try to keep the same tone as the 1528 speaker. So even if you matched like a front set of 1528 with a rear set of 1610s, they would meld great. And then we have a bookshelf speaker, a ported bookshelf. The tower is also ported. With a single 8-inch woofer and then the same waveguide assembly with a mid-range and a tweeter. And then we have a center speaker with 2 8-inch woofers and then the waveguide assembly, so the 5-inch mid-range and the tweeter, which is also ported. And what we changed on this speaker from the 1528 is we went for a bit higher sensitivity, and that reduces then obviously the low-end extension a little bit, but it will be much easier to drive with a more normal AV receiver, for example. So you have around 89 dB sensitivity on that speaker versus 85 or so on the 1528. And then we have a slim speaker. So that's the last speaker in the 1610 line, which is basically a bookshelf, but without the port, and then a much shallower cabinet. Gotcha. So it's easy to hang on walls, even ceiling. For it could be a surround speaker, it could be a height speaker, you could even use it as a LCR front stage, as long as you have a subwoofer in the system.
Awesome. So one of the main takeaways that I get from the last time that I'm here to this time is that there is a lot of audiophile roots. There's a lot of like 2-channel system design and consideration when you're building these speakers, and that's your primary focus. Like you want not just high SPL, like you want very clean, precise.
Oh yeah, we wanted both, right? So sound quality is the top priority, but then we also want it to perform so you can play loud and without distortion. And I think that was probably the biggest problem we had with trying drivers from current manufacturers out there that do high-end drivers, quote unquote, which many of which sounded good and had great distortion when you're measuring at 90 dB or so. But we were really pushing the envelope. So when you're past the 110 dB point, most of these drivers would be in just complete excessive distortion, and they would compress wildly and just not play along. Whereas the mid-range that we have now, it almost coasts at 110 dB, and it's like 1/10 of the distortion of many of these normal quote unquote hi-fi drivers.
And this kind of goes into what Doug mentions about these speakers, which is a little bit of the effortlessness of those speakers getting driven.
Yeah, that I think has a huge impact on it, because the drivers or the speaker is really just coasting when you're listening to normal listening levels, right? So it's not really giving much effort. Kind of like a big engine car, just cruising along, and then you still have the torque right there when you need it and when you want it, and it gives this effortlessness in the sound scale. And
just kind of pull back the reference from the Butyl. So earlier today, you were showing me some of the, I'm going to call them engineering samples, some of your prototypes of the waveguide and the tweeter assembly and all of that and the lens from the 1610. Now, I think it was the bookshelf that we were looking at, but this kind of applies to all of them.
Yep.
And the precision that you go to and the details that you go to. And I should mention that one of the other things that is very clear from our time here is that there's not only the aesthetics, there's not only the kind of it sounding good and you guys listening to it, but there's also a lot of measurements. And since the last time, you guys were already doing crazy amounts of measurements before, but you now have a clipable machine literally in the space, in your kind of studio.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that goes into it. Tell me a little bit about this lens guide and the details and the amount of iterations and why butyl is such a big part of this.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a couple of 3D printers. Luckily, I would say, because we've printed so many waveguides and a lot more tweeter lenses. We're filling the garbage with plastic every month. But the butyl comes in on mostly the tweeter lens, right? So you can see that there's like a pattern that's covered. So some of the holes are open, like just a normal perforated grill. And then we have covered some of these holes strategically to get the best really distortion and sensitivity profile in the upper frequency range of the tweeter. And then also to get the best off-axis response. So I have done, hundreds, thousands of measurements on different solutions with butyl covering just this hole instead of that hole. And there's how many holes? I don't know.
Hundreds of holes.
So there's been a lot of trial and error on the butyl side for just finding the perfect balance from the off-axis response and the on-axis response. It's always some sort of a compromise when you're building speakers like this also. I think maybe more so in the past when measuring equipment like the clipable NFS wasn't that prevalent, and it just took too much time to do full spin Raman measurements of speakers in the development phase. It was easier to more focus on just the on-axis response, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing now is I'm compromising on the on-axis response in some regards to get really the kind of the estimated in-room response that I'm looking for on the speaker. So it would have a good balance on the sound power and also the on-axis response to create like the best sound in the room when you're listening, and not just in anechoic on-axis measurements, right?
In a real environment, how people are actually going to be hearing the speakers.
Where you have sidewalls and you have a ceiling and you have a floor.
Yeah, and furniture, presumably.
Yeah. Also.
So I know, and you're being very generous with the time, and I don't want to take up too much. I actually, you know what? We have a ton of videos on our Soundstage YouTube channel that are going to go into the 1610 and going to go into kind of an overview and some technical stuff. So one of the things that we do at the end of every podcast episode, especially with new guests, 'cause it's always fun learning a little bit about them. If there was a song or a soundtrack or an album that you could either listen to all of the time and it will just always be something that you love to sit down and enjoy, or something that you're listening to right now that I could steal from your brain and add to my Spotify playlist, is there a band, a song, an album that you could share with us?
I think I'm probably a bit different than a lot of people in that regard. See, I have some songs, of course, that I put into a list that I enjoy listening to. But where I really thrive and where I live is on my daily new recommended list in titles. So I'm always searching for what's new out there, what haven't I heard, what am I missing out on. And I think actually that goes into other aspects of my life. It is like with food, and I love whiskey also. I tend to always want to try something new. Right, so even with a bottle of whiskey that I love, I'll go grab a new one, even though I don't have the one I really love, because I want to see, is there, am I missing out on something new, something that I haven't discovered yet? So I think I'm always on this path of discovery of new songs and new artists. So I can't really say that I can choose one song or one album that I would try with. I would get really bored, I think, if I listen to one song over and over too much.
Well, there you go. I don't have anything for my Spotify playlist right now, but I'm sure when we go and listen to these 1610s in a couple of minutes, we'll find something.
That'll be something.
Thank you so much, Thomas. All the best.
Thank you, Jorden.